The wind over Red Hollow carried dust, heat, and the kind of silence that settled deep into a person's bones. Clara Whitfield had grown used to all of it. She had to, because silence was all she had left after her husband died 2 winters ago, taken by a fever that swept through the valley like a ghost. Since then, the ranch that had once been full of laughter, cattle, and soft-spoken dreams had become her battleground. Every board she hammered, every fence she repaired, every dawn she woke alone was a reminder that her life was something she had to hold together with her own 2 hands. Most people in town thought she should sell the small farm. A woman alone can't keep up a ranch, they'd say when they thought she couldn't hear. Others whispered she should remarry quickly. Some offered themselves for the roll men who thought a widow made an easy bargain. Clara turned them all away. The grief hadn't faded. It had simply hardened into a kind of stubborn independence. She wasn't afraid of hard work. But even the strongest backs had limits, and the sun that afternoon was merciless. She'd been hauling new fence posts along the east line since sunrise, determined to finish before a wandering group of cattle figured out the weak spot and pushed their way through. Sweat dampened her shirt, ran down her neck, and stung her eyes. She leaned one post against her shoulder, muscles trembling. "One more," she muttered. "Just one more." But her body had other ideas. The ground tilted. The sky wavered like heat mirage. She took a step and felt her knee buckle. Before she realized what was happening, her legs gave way entirely and she collapsed into the dirt. Dust puffing up around her like a defeated Psyduck, Clara tried to push herself up. But the world spun in wide, dizzying circles. She squeezed her eyes shut, panting, silently cursing her own weakness. She'd worked too long without water, too long without rest, too long pretending she wasn't still terribly human. Bootsteps approached light, deliberate and utterly unfamiliar. She forced her eyes open. A tall shadow blocked the sun. Broad shoulders, long braids streaked with silver, weathered skin painted by the desert wind. The man looking down at her wasn't from town. She would have known him if he were. Red Hollow wasn't large enough to keep strangers secret. His voice was calm, deep as an old river. "You should not be working alone in this heat." Clara blinked hard. The stranger kneeled beside her, his movements slow enough not to startle. Up close, she recognized him after all, not from town, but from rumors. Gray Hawk, an older Apache horse trainer who lived north of the valley, rumored to be half wild, half myth, and entirely dangerous depending on who was talking. Folks in Red Hollow kept their distance from him, though no one ever pointed to a real reason why. He touched her shoulder lightly. "Can you sit?" She nodded, embarrassed beyond measure. He helped her upright with careful hands, as if she were made of glass. Strength radiated from him, not boastful, not loud, simply present. The kind of strength born from living close to the land for a very long time. "I am fine," she lied. His dark eyes held no judgment, only steady patience. "You fainted." "I didn't faint," she insisted, though her voice wobbled. "I just lost my footing." He lifted one brow, a faint spark of humor warming his expression. "Then your footing must be lost very far. It will take time to find it again." Despite her frustration, a laugh escaped her, short, surprised, unwilling. She didn't laugh often anymore. Not since the funeral. Gray Hawk reached for his waterskin and offered it. She took it with trembling fingers and drank, the cool liquid sliding down her throat like salvation. As she handed it back, she noticed his hands large, steady, and scarred with the history of work and wilderness. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once. "You should rest. Your strength is not gone, only tired." Clara looked at the half-finished fence line stretching behind her. Her pride rose up like a barricade. "I can't leave this. I have to get it done today." Gray Hawk glanced at the fence, then at her. Then at the sun beating mercilessly overhead, "You do not have to get it done alone." Those simple words softened something she didn't realize was clenched inside her. She hadn't accepted help from anyone since her husband died. But looking into Greyhawk's calm, steady face, she felt something unfamiliar. Trust. And maybe, just maybe, the first stirrings of a new story she wasn't ready to name yet. Greyhawk didn't linger after helping Clara back to her porch. He stayed only long enough to make sure her breathing steadied, then rose to leave with the quiet intention of a man who didn't expect thanks. Though Clara's pulse still fluttered from the heat and from him, she found herself calling after him. "Wait. You know my name, but I don't know yours." He paused, turned, and met her eyes without hesitation. "Greyhawk," he said simply, as though the name had always been part of the wind that shaped the valley. She'd heard it whispered by folks in Red Hollow, always in a tone that teetered between awe and suspicion. Some claimed he'd once been a fierce warrior. Others said he lived alone because he trusted no one. But looking at the man now, Clara found none of the harshness she'd been warned about. His presence was quiet-rooted, like an old oak tree that weathered storms without bending. He dipped his head respectfully. "I was riding by when I saw you fall. The land tells stories your horses were restless." Clara blinked, surprised. "You could tell that from all the way out there?" His mouth curved in a humble half-smile. "Horses speak loudly to those who listen." Before she could answer, he slipped away with long, even strides. Leaving her porch steps feeling strangely empty. The next morning, when Clara stepped outside with her coffee, she found someone had finished repairing the east fence line. Every post driven deep, every rail straight, every knot tied securely with practiced hands. She didn't need a signature to know who had done it. The discovery left her breathless with a mix of gratitude and discomfort she couldn't quite name. No man had helped her without some ulterior motive before, not since her husband passed. Most men in town offered help in exchange for courting rights, land leverage, or gossip advantage. Greyhawk hadn't asked for anything, not even acknowledgement. That alone made him more dangerous to her peace than all the rumors combined. Later that week, Clara rode into town for supplies. The dusty streets of Red Hollow were lively for such a small place, children chasing one another, wagons rattling over the hard ground, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoing from the corner shop. As she tied her mare outside Miller's General Store, she overheard two ranchers speaking low by the water trough. "Heard old Greyhawk was near Whitfield Ranch," one muttered. "Man's too old to be wandering alone out there." The other snorted. "He's too old for plenty, but not for trouble. Mark my words, he's looking for something, that one." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, part irritation, part protectiveness she didn't expect. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "He was riding by," she said coolly, "and he helped me when I collapsed from the heat. That's all." The men exchanged looks that twisted her stomach. Pity, judgment, and something uglier. "Well," one drawled, "just be careful. You don't want folks saying—" "I don't care what folks say," Clara cut in, sharper than she intended. "If someone is decent enough to help, that's more than I can say for most men around here." They fell silent at that, and she swept past them, heart pounding. Maybe she shouldn't have snapped, but something inside her bristled at the thought of anyone disparaging a man who had shown only kindness. Inside the store, old Mrs. Miller leaned close as she rang up Clara's flour and coffee. "That Apache? He's older than he looks. Years of hard living." "Be careful, dear." Clara swallowed. "Older doesn't mean dangerous." Mrs. Miller's eyebrows climbed. "You sure?" Clara opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wasn't sure, not of him, not of her growing curiosity about him, not of the way her breath hitched whenever she remembered the quiet steadiness in his eyes, but she did know this. She'd never once felt unsafe in his presence. That evening, as the sun melted into the desert and stretched gold across her fields, Clara found Greyhawk near her corral, calming a skittish mare that had jumped the fence earlier. He wasn't touching the horse, just standing still, allowing the animal to approach him in its own time. "You didn't have to come back," she said softly. "He didn't look surprised you'd found him." "I heard your mare from the ridge." She was calling. Clara stepped closer. "People in town say you're too old to be roaming like this." Greyhawk lifted his chin, eyes warm with something like amusement. "People in town say many things. Truth is quiet. Gossip is loud." Her lips tugged upward. "They misunderstand you." He shrugged one shoulder. "I am not here to be understood." But when his gaze settled on her steady, deep, unguarded, Clara wondered if maybe he was here for something else. Something neither of them was ready to name. The next few days passed in a rhythm Clara hadn't known she was missing. Each morning, she'd step out onto the porch to find the chores already half done, fence lines checked, horses watered, the east trough cleared of debris blown in overnight. No footprints in the dirt. No sign of who had helped. But she knew. Greyhawk moved through the land like wind through tall grass, seen only in the way things quietly aligned behind him. Clara tried to thank him once. She saddled her mare and rode toward the northern ridge, hoping lightning might strike twice and she'd accidentally cross his path. She didn't find him. What she did find was a stack of seasoned firewood and a set of mended stirrup straps waiting by her barn the next morning. His answer, she supposed, to her gratitude. Not needed. But given anyway. By the fourth day, after a sudden morning squall soaked the valley, Clara went out to check her cattle. The clay ground still shone with puddles, the air thick and warm enough to cling to skin. Halfway through her rounds, she heard footsteps, light, deliberate. The exact cadence burned in her memory. She didn't turn. "I was beginning to wonder," she said softly. "If you only show up when the sun does." A faint chuckle rumbled behind her. The storm was brief, but it left signs, tracks, broken branches. A few frightened horses. She already knew he wasn't talking about the animals. She faced him. Greyhawk stood at the fence line, droplets of water glistening in the strands of silver woven through his dark braids. His shirt clung to him from the lingering damp, outlining the broad, weathered strength beneath. His gaze traveled her face, taking quiet inventory as if making sure she was safe. "You came to check on me," she said. He didn't deny it. "You work alone too much." "And you watch too closely," she replied, but there was no bite in her voice. Only warmth. Something new, tentative, unsettling. He walked closer, not quickly, not hesitantly, simply with the weight of a man who respected space but didn't fear closeness. Clara felt the air shift as he approached, heat rising under her skin despite the cool dampness lingering in the air. He stopped a few feet away. A respectful distance. A frustrating one. "You push yourself," he said. "Even when the land says rest." Clara crossed her arms, partly defensive, partly to steady herself. "The land doesn't pay my bills." "No," he agreed. "But it listens. More than most people do." She opened her mouth to argue, but a roll of thunder echoed across the hills, remnants of the storm, fading but still present. The sudden sound spooked a nearby colt, who bolted toward the far end of the corral, nearly knocking Clara off balance as he rushed past. Before she could stumble, Greyhawk's hand shot out fast for a man his age, faster than she expected, and closed gently around her elbow. His touch was warm, steady, firm, without force. For a moment she froze, not because she was frightened, because she wasn't. She could feel his strength through that single point of contact. A strength not wasted on bravado or youth, but refined, earned by a lifetime of survival. His fingers did not shake. His grip did not waver. His presence wrapped around her like a steadying blanket. She inhaled sharply, and that tiny, unguarded breath changed the air between them. Clara knew he felt it too, the shift. The spark, the awareness humming just beneath the skin. She stepped back too fast. I'm fine. Greyhawk's hand fell to his side. You are. His voice was low, warm, and patient. Infuriatingly patient. As if he understood the very thing she refused to say aloud, that her pulse was racing, her breath uneven. Her thoughts tangled with questions she wasn't brave enough to name. The sky darkened with another roll of thunder. A storm was building again, quick and unpredictable. The scent of rain rose from the ground as wind swept across the valley. We should get inside, Clara said. Greyhawk nodded, stepping aside so she could pass. But when she moved toward the barn, a sudden lightning flash split the sky, illuminating the land in stark white. She flinched, instinctively reaching out, her fingers grazing his hand. His hand tightened around hers just long enough to steady her. Only then did he release her. In the barn, under the warm scent of hay and horses, they stood only a few feet apart. Rain hammered the roof in wild rhythm, filling the space with sound that made their silence feel even more intimate. Clara's pulse skittered. You don't have to stay. I know, he said. But he did. He stayed a few steps away, leaning against a beam, quiet and protective in a way that felt more intimate than any touch. He didn't crowd her, didn't rush her, didn't expect anything. He simply waited, a lesson in patience she felt deep in her bones. A lesson she wasn't sure she was ready for, and yet, part of her wasn't sure she could walk away from it either. The next afternoon, the sun poured gold across the valley like a spotlight, baking the red clay and casting long shadows from the fence posts. Clara was at the corral again, checking the new foal that had been born earlier in the week. Its tiny legs wobbled as it tried to stand, and the mare nudged it protectively. Clara smiled softly, reaching out to steady the foal, but the moment she touched it, the colt made a sudden, panicked leap, knocking her sideways. Time slowed. She felt herself tipping toward the ground, the dust rising like smoke around her. And then strong hands were beneath her arms, lifting her upright with an ease that made her heart skip. Greyhawk. He held her steady, his face close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver in his braids glinting in the sun, the faint dust smudges on his cheeks from working the land. His dark eyes met hers, steady, warm, and unyielding. I've got you, he said softly, almost as if stating a fact. Not a promise. Not a plea. A fact. Clara's breath hitched. The rhythm of his heartbeat was audible in the stillness between them, or maybe it was her own. She tried to pull back, tried to regain her composure, but the warmth radiating from him was impossible to ignore. Her pulse raced in ways she hadn't felt in years, not since before the fever took her husband. Not since the silence had wrapped itself around her like a blanket. And then it happened. Words she didn't mean to say slipped out, raw and flustered. You're too old for this, she blurted, the sound of her own voice startling her. Greyhawk froze, but only for a fraction of a second. Then the faintest curve of amusement touched his lips. Too old? He asked, his deep voice calm as the river after a storm. Little dove, I am too old for games. Not for the truth. Clara felt her cheeks heat. She had meant it as a scolding, a way to regain control of the panic and heat that had surged through her body. But his words weren't harsh. They weren't teasing in a cruel way. They carried no mockery, only understanding. And in that understanding, a quiet, steady fire kindled in her chest. He didn't release her arms. He kept his hands there, supportive, reassuring, patient. The touch wasn't demanding. It didn't claim. It simply existed. And yet, it said everything. You. Clara stammered, trying to regain control. I mean, you shouldn't. Shouldn't what? Greyhawk asked gently. Save a woman from falling? Hold her steady when the world spins? Or should I not be honest about what I feel? His eyes searched hers, patient and unwavering. I am not too old for truth, Clara. Her knees wobbled. She wasn't used to being seen like this, not by anyone. Certainly not by a man whose reputation was larger than life, whose age carried weight, whose mere presence could silence whispers in Red Hollow. Yet here he was, not larger than life in front of her, but grounded, solid, unwavering. The foal nudged her leg, drawing her attention for a brief moment. Clara laughed softly, a little breathless. Even your horses seem to understand you, she said, the words almost a whisper. Greyhawk's hands did not falter. They do, but so do I. There was no rush in his stance, no expectation in his hold. Just patience. Just presence. And for Clara, who had spent years alone, that was more intimate than anything else could be. Finally, after a moment that felt stretched between heartbeats and sunlight, Greyhawk stepped back just slightly, though his gaze remained on her. You are stronger than you know, he said, but you do not have to be alone. Clara swallowed hard, the heat of the afternoon sun mingling with the warmth in her chest. She had thought herself immune to the pull of another soul, especially a man older, wiser, and feared by the town. But here he was, proving with every calm motion and steady gaze that the heart did not heed age, reputation, or fear. Her voice came out in a soft, almost trembling whisper. I don't know how to trust that. Greyhawk merely smiled. Then we'll take it one moment at a time. No rush. No pressure. Just truth, Clara realized with a shock that she didn't want him to let go. Not yet. Not ever, if she could help it. The afternoon stretched on, dust and sunlight painting the valley gold around them. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, seen, steady, and strangely safe. All because a man, older than the whispers claimed, had caught her when she fell and stayed close enough to show her that age didn't diminish strength, patience, or the capacity to care. The afternoon sun burned low in the sky, washing the valley in gold and orange hues that made the Red Hollow hills look like they were on fire. Clara worked quietly in her corral, checking the gates and brushing down the horses after a morning of riding. Every sound, the scrape of hooves on dirt, the hiss of wind through the corral posts, the low murmur of the foal seemed louder somehow, more alive. She sensed rather than saw him before he spoke. Mind if I help? Greyhawk's voice was calm, almost soft, but carried the weight of someone used to being heard without needing to shout. Clara glanced up, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He stood at the gate, hat tipped back slightly, the lines of his face softened by the late sunlight. His hands were dusted with earth. Sleeves rolled, sleeves rolled, sleeves rolled. A picture of steady capability. You don't have to, she said, even though a small part of her was grateful for the presence of someone who made the work feel less heavy. He didn't move forward immediately. He just nodded toward the corral, the foal, the mare, and the half-finished repairs. I see work to be done, but I also see someone who's worn herself too thin. She sighed, and then, almost without thinking, dropped her brush. I've managed fine this long. You've managed alone, he corrected gently. But alone doesn't always mean strong. Sometimes it just means tired. She looked at him, startled by the quiet truth in his words. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let him walk along the corral, inspecting the posts, touching the horses in the same careful, measured way she'd seen him do before. There was a tenderness there, a respect for life, human and animal alike, that made her chest ache with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. He approached her slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed. "Let me show you something," he said. Before she could respond, he guided her to a post she had been struggling to straighten. With two strong hands, he positioned the wood while she steadied it. The movement was seamless, a quiet dance of cooperation. Neither of them spoke for a moment, but the air between them thrummed with silent understanding. Her pulse began to quicken not from exertion, but from the awareness of him so close, his strength obvious yet controlled. She could feel the warmth radiating off him, the faint scent of earth and sun-baked leather. Every breath, every motion was precise, careful, and unhurried. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't forcing anything. He simply was, and in that being, Clara felt a stirring inside her she hadn't experienced in years. It was the pull of trust, of safety, of someone who saw her, not just the work she did, or the widow she'd been, but the woman she was beneath the dust, sweat, and grief. The mare nudged the foal toward them, breaking the tension with a soft whinny. Greyhawk crouched slightly, letting the small horse approach. Clara watched the way he moved, calm, grounded, patient, and realized he had shown her more about gentleness than any man she had ever met. Finally, he looked up at her, eyes catching the last rays of sun. "You don't have to do everything by yourself," he said quietly. "Not anymore." She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief. She wanted to speak, to argue, to say she could manage. But somehow, his words had disarmed her completely. She only nodded, letting herself feel the weight of their meaning. Greyhawk extended a hand, not commanding, not demanding, simply offering. Clara hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her own hand in his. The connection was electric, steady, and grounding all at once. She realized with a shock that this small gesture, the intertwining of their hands, was changing everything. For the rest of the afternoon, they worked side by side. Words were sparse. There were small smiles, shared glances, the occasional light teasing about stubborn horses or wayward posts. But in the silences, Clara understood something she hadn't admitted before. She had been waiting, not consciously, not knowingly, for someone who could meet her. Strength with equal steadiness by the time the sun had slipped behind the hills. Casting long shadows across the valley, Clara's corral was repaired. The horses fed and calm, and her heart lighter. She looked at Greyhawk, standing quietly nearby, and felt a gratitude deeper than any words could express. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just surviving. She was alive, and she knew, without question, that the afternoon had changed everything. The next morning, Red Hollow was alive with whispers before the sun had even fully climbed above the hills. Clara could hear them as she rode into town, the soft shuffle of boots on dusty streets carrying rumors faster than the wind carried the scent of hay. She had thought her mornings with Greyhawk were private, but small towns rarely keep secrets, especially when the subject was an older Apache man showing care to a young widow. She dismounted at Miller's General Store, tying her mare to the post. Already, she felt the eyes of townsfolk on her, curious and judgmental. Mothers nudged their children aside, old men muttered under their breaths, and the local gossipers whispered loudly enough to make her chest tighten. "They say she's letting him near her," one woman said. Her voice was sharp with disapproval. "After everything, after her husband." "She's asking for trouble," another muttered. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. She had grown used to people talking about her late husband, her ranch, her independence, but this felt different. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was suspicion, judgment, a sense that she was doing something wrong simply by existing in her own life. Inside the store, she found Mrs. Miller arranging sacks of flour. The older woman glanced up, concern in her eyes. "Clara," she said quietly, "the town? They're talking." Clara exhaled, trying to keep her face calm. "Let them," she said, though her voice betrayed her frustration. "Greyhawk has done nothing wrong." Mrs. Miller's lips pressed into a thin line. "They'll see it differently. People in Red Hollow fear what they don't understand." "They always have," Clara said, her voice low. She left the store, determined to finish her errands quickly. Yet even as she moved through the streets, she couldn't escape the whispers. Men who had tipped their hats now averted their eyes. Women who had once offered polite greetings now clutched their skirts nervously. Clara could feel the weight of their judgments pressing down like the summer sun, relentless and harsh. By the time she returned to her ranch, her stomach was tight with anxiety. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the corral, painting the red clay gold. And there he was, Greyhawk, leaning against the fence, his broad frame relaxed but alert, as if he could sense the tension before she even spoke. "You look troubled," he said. His voice calm, measured. She shook her head. "The town? They've heard of us. Of you. And they're talking." He straightened fully, the sunlight catching the silver in his braids. "Let them talk," he said simply. "Their fear is not our burden." Clara stared at him, astonished. Most men would have bristled, perhaps even angered at the gossip. Greyhawk didn't. His composure was absolute. His calm strength, the same strength that had saved her from falling, steadied her in ways no words could. "But they'll—" she began, hesitating, unsure how to finish the sentence. "They'll say what they will," he interrupted gently. "And yet here you are, standing. Your land is intact. Your life continues. Nothing has changed except their whispers." He took a slow step toward her, careful and deliberate. "You do not have to defend yourself to them. You do not have to explain what is yours to anyone." Clara felt her chest unclench slightly. His words were more than comfort. They were a shield against the town's judgment. She realized with a shock how deeply she had come to rely on his presence, how much steadier she felt with him near. Then she laughed softly, a sound of relief and disbelief. "You make it sound so simple," she said. "It is simple," Greyhawk replied, eyes glinting with something warm and knowing. "We are who we are. Let them fear. Let them gossip. We will do the work, tend the land, and live as we must." Clara's heart swelled. For the first time in years, she felt truly unburdened by the opinions of others. And she realized, with a thrill she could barely contain, that Greyhawk's steady presence wasn't just comforting, it was transformative. He had not only saved her from a fall, but from herself, from fear, from doubt, from the invisible chains of judgment that had held her for so long. As the sun dipped lower behind the hills, painting the corral in fiery amber, Clara and Greyhawk worked side by side. The whispers of Red Hollow faded into nothing compared to the quiet rhythm of their labor, the shared understanding growing between them. By the time the day ended, Clara knew that no rumor, no judgment, and no fear could touch what had begun between them. Their bond, forged in patience, care, and quiet strength, was stronger than any town's opinion. And for the first time, she felt ready not just to face the town, but to embrace the possibility of life, love, and partnership. On her own terms, the morning sun barely warmed the streets of Red Hollow when Clara realized she could no longer let whispers or cautious glances dictate her life. The town had murmured long enough. They had judged long enough. And today, she decided, she would stand firmly in her own truth, come what may. Clara mounted her mare with purposeful strength, the reins gripped tight in her calloused hands. Her hat shielded her face from the early sun, but she did not hide her resolve. Every step of her ride into town felt like a declaration. The dusty road was familiar, but it seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the certainty in her heart. She would not shrink for the opinions of others. She would not cower for the sake of propriety. Not anymore. When she reached the town square, she spotted him immediately. Greyhawk stood beside the water trough, a quiet sentinel, watching the town wake. His broad shoulders caught the sunlight, and the faint silver in his braids glinted like metal. Even the townsfolk, who had whispered so freely, paused as they noticed him, their eyes widening with a mix of awe and apprehension. Clara took a deep breath, letting the morning air steady her. Her heart pounded, but she knew this was the moment to claim what truly mattered. With deliberate steps, she rode straight toward him, the dust rising in lazy clouds around her mare's hooves. Every whispering glance, every skeptical frown, every sideways glance from the townsfolk faded from her awareness. There was only him and the choice she was about to make. "Greyhawk," she said, her voice ringing clear across the square. He turned at once, his dark eyes locking on hers. There was no question, no hesitation in his gaze, only quiet strength, patience, and unwavering steadiness. He smiled, faint but certain, as if he had known she would arrive. She dismounted, swinging her legs over the saddle with practiced ease, and walked toward him. The townsfolk fell silent. Children paused in their games. Old men and women leaned on fences, watching. She did not falter. She would not falter. Standing before him, she lifted her chin and placed her hand in his. The touch was firm, confident, and deliberate, signaling to everyone that this bond, this connection, was hers to claim, and hers alone. "This is my choice," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "He is my partner, my companion, and my friend. I will not hide from it. Not for anyone." The town held its breath. The weight of her declaration hung in the air, a tangible shift. Some faces reddened with shock, others with curiosity, but Clara did not waver. She had spent years bending to expectations, surviving in silence. Now she was standing tall, and she would not retreat. Greyhawk's eyes softened, and he gave the tiniest nod, acknowledging her courage without diminishing it. "Little dove," he said, his voice low but carrying across the square, "I am honored." Clara felt a swell of warmth in her chest. Not from his words alone, but from the knowledge that she had chosen her own life, her own happiness, and no amount of gossip or judgment could take that away. The townsfolk murmured among themselves. Some looked uneasy, some intrigued, but the energy in the square had shifted. Clara's stance steady, unyielding, and proud spoke louder than any whisper. "You see," Greyhawk said, turning slightly to the gathered crowd, "a person's worth is not measured by age, rumor, or fear. It is measured by courage, honesty, and the strength to stand by what is right for them." The square was quiet, as if the entire town was listening to more than his words, listening to the truth that Clara had declared simply by being unafraid. Clara squeezed his hand, a small private gesture amidst the public affirmation. His fingers tightened around hers in return, a silent promise of partnership, loyalty, and steadfast care. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the gossip, not the doubts, not the fear. They were together, and that was enough. As the sun climbed higher, casting light across the town, Clara felt a freedom she had not known in years. For the first time, she realized she could live fully, without apology, without hiding. She had claimed what mattered: her heart, her choice, and her right to love freely. Greyhawk gently guided her back toward her ranch as the townsfolk began to stir, whispers fading into murmurs of acceptance, curiosity, and admiration. Clara's heart felt light, strong, and steady, echoing the rhythm of the land she had fought so hard to protect. And as they walked side by side, she knew, without doubt, that no matter what the town thought, what truly mattered was here. In this hand she held, in this bond they shared, in this life they would face together. The months that followed Clara's declaration in the town square passed like a warm, steady wind over Red Hollow. Life returned to its rhythms: early mornings, hard work on the ranch, the quiet hum of horses and livestock, but now it carried a new kind of light, one that came not just from the sun, but from the steady presence of Greyhawk at her side. The townsfolk had slowly begun to accept what they had once whispered about. Some were curious. Some remained skeptical. But Clara no longer cared. She had claimed her choice, her life, and her happiness. And more than that, she had found a partner whose strength and patience matched her own. Greyhawk's quiet confidence never failed to ground her, and she discovered that she was stronger for having him near, every day. He taught her lessons without words: how to read the land for hidden signs of danger, how to calm a frightened horse, how to trust her instincts without fear of failure. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she was willing to give, and yet his presence was constant, unwavering. Clara had once thought love was dangerous, unpredictable, and fleeting. Now she saw that it could be steady, like the desert itself, harsh at times, yet enduring, beautiful, and true. They worked side by side in the fields, often in companionable silence. Clara's hands moved with practiced skill, but now she noticed the comfort of his hands near hers, the quiet strength he lent to even the simplest chores. He would occasionally offer a quiet word, a suggestion, or a soft laugh at her stubbornness when the horses refused to cooperate. Each small gesture reinforced the bond they shared, building something far deeper than fleeting attraction, a trust that neither time nor rumor could shake. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the valley in warm amber, Clara found herself leaning against the corral fence, watching Greyhawk gently calm a young stallion. The sight of him, calm, steady, and confident, made her chest ache with a tender, unspoken gratitude. She realized how much she had feared loneliness, how much she had relied on her own stubborn independence to survive. But now, with him by her side, she understood that independence and partnership could coexist. Strength, she realized, could be shared without diminishing either person. Greyhawk glanced over his shoulder and caught her watching him. His eyes softened, and he nodded ever so slightly. Clara felt a thrill run through her. She walked toward him, her boots crunching softly in the dry earth, and he did not step away. Instead, he extended his hand, a gesture of invitation, trust, and connection all at once. "I think," Clara began, her voice low but steady, "that we found something worth holding on to." Greyhawk's smile was quiet, but it held a depth that made her heart skip. "I've always known it," he said, "but it seems we've both learned how to cherish it." They stood there for a long moment, hands intertwined, watching the shadows stretch across the valley. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth, a reminder that this land, much like their bond, was both tough and beautiful. Clara felt a peace she had never thought possible, the kind that comes from knowing someone is not only beside you but with you in every way that matters. Weeks turned to months, and the season shifted over Red Hollow. Winter winds blew cold across the valley, only to give way to the warm promise of spring. Through it all, Clara and Greyhawk remained side by side, tending the ranch, guiding the horses, and sharing the quiet intimacy of a life built together. Each day strengthened their connection. Each challenge reinforced their reliance on one another. At night, when the stars stretched endlessly across the desert sky, Clara often stood on her porch, Greyhawk at her side, and felt the depth of their bond in the silence. She no longer feared loneliness or judgment. She had found a love steady enough to weather both time and trial, a partnership grounded in patience, respect, and unwavering trust. In the end, the town could whisper, gossip, and speculate all it wanted. Clara didn't care. What mattered was right here in the touch of his hand, the steadiness of his gaze, and the life they had chosen together. Red Hollow had not changed, but she had. And in finding Greyhawk, she had found herself as well. A life filled with work, love, and quiet joy stretched out before them, like the endless desert, beautiful, enduring, and as steady as the hearts that had chosen each other. And so, with the sun dipping behind the western hills and casting long shadows over the ranch, Clara and Greyhawk stood side by side, ready to face every tomorrow together. Love, they realized, was not a wildfire that burned briefly and died. It was the desert itself, timeless, steadfast, and endless.